The morning everything changed, Marlena was on her knees behind the espresso machine with a dish towel in one hand and a YouTube tutorial paused on her phone in the other, trying to figure out why the steam wand sounded like it was gargling when Finn climbed under the front counter and announced that he was a cave dinosaur who lived in the dark. Cave dinosaurs are extinct, she said without looking up. Not this one. Fair enough. The door chimed. She stood, wiped her hands on her apron. The one that read Little Seedlings Café in hand-stitched letters her mother had done the week before opening, slightly uneven, absolutely irreplaceable, and turned to greet whoever had walked in out of the November rain. He was standing just inside the doorway, shoulders damp, making no particular effort to shake off the water. Dark coat, dark hair, the kind of stillness that looked less like patience and more like a permanent condition. He scanned the room the way people did when they were cataloging exits, not admiring the decor, and Marlena had put real thought into the decor, the reclaimed wood shelving, and the little chalkboard menu and the string lights she'd strung herself over 3 evenings while Finn slept. "Just coffee," he said before she could ask. "Black." She made it without further conversation. He sat at the table nearest the back wall, positioned so he could see the full room and the front door, and he didn't look at his phone. He just drank his coffee and watched the rain on the window. He left a 20 on the table for a $3 cup. She thought about him for the rest of the afternoon and told herself it was because of the 20. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the end of the first week, Marlena knew his order, his window of arrival, somewhere between 8:15 and 8:40, rarely deviating, and the fact that he always chose the same chair. She didn't know his name. He didn't offer it. There was a quality to his silence that made small talk feel impertinent, like trying to make conversation with weather. What she noticed, because she was the kind of person who noticed things even when she'd prefer not to. His hands when he held the cup, which were steady in a way that suggested control rather than calm. The slight pause before he answered direct questions, like he was running them through something first. The way his eyes moved when the door opened. None of this was her business. She filed it in the category of things that were interesting but irrelevant and went back to managing the morning rush. It was Finn who dismantled that arrangement entirely. He was there on a Wednesday. Preschool closed for a staff development day, Colleen running 30 minutes late, sitting at the small table by the pastry case with his crayons and his dinosaur encyclopedia, conducting what appeared to be a detailed classification exercise that involved a lot of whispering. Marlena had convinced herself he was fine, contained, basically invisible to the man at the back table. When she heard a chair scrape and looked up to find Finn standing directly in front of a stranger who outweighed him by approximately 200 pounds. "That's a blue pen," Finn said, pointing. "It is," the man said. "I have a blue crayon. It's not the same shade." "No," the man agreed, "it's not." Marlena was already moving, mouthing apologies she hadn't said yet, but she stopped when she saw that the man had turned to face Finn fully, not a polite half-turn. Actually turned the way you turn for someone whose words were worth your complete attention. He'd set down the pen. "Come on, buddy." She arrived at the table. "Don't bother." "He's not bothering me." She looked at the man. He was looking at Finn, who had already climbed onto the chair across from him with the air of someone concluding an arrangement both parties had already agreed to. "He's going to show me his dinosaur book," Finn said. "I said that?" "You were going to." The man's expression did something subtle and complicated near the corners. Not a smile, exactly, but the neighborhood a smile lived in. He looked up at Marlena. "He's right, I was." She went back to the counter. She reorganized things that didn't need reorganizing. She watched in her peripheral vision as Finn narrated every page with the seriousness of a tenured professor, and the man listened. Actually listened. Tracking each page, asking one question about brachiosauruses versus brontosauruses that Finn answered with the precision of someone who had spent 4 years waiting for exactly this opportunity. When Finn finally slid off the chair and drifted back to his crayons, the man looked up across the room and found Marlena watching him. She looked away first. "His name is Dante," Colleen told her, 2.5 weeks in, sliding onto the counter stool like she'd been there all day. "I asked him when you were pulling the afternoon bread." Marlena set down the milk pitcher. "I didn't ask you to do that. You've been dying to know and refusing to do anything about it. I was doing you a favor." "I was fine not knowing." "You were absolutely not fine. You've been making his coffee before he even sits down for a week and a half." Colleen stole a corner of Marlena's croissant, which was hers and had her name on it, metaphorically. "Dante, no last name." He smiled when I asked. "He doesn't smile." "He does when you're not watching." Marlena turned to face the espresso machine and told herself she wasn't flushing. She had made very specific choices 4 years ago that had produced a very specific and manageable life. She had been 29, freshly out of a 4-year relationship that had ended with her fiancé's very calm, very devastating announcement that he didn't think he wanted children after all, and she had done the math on her age and her finances, and the specific grief of imagining a future in which she waited for someone else to want the same things she did. She'd walked into a fertility clinic with money borrowed from her mother, chosen an anonymous donor from a profile that had listed health history and education and not much else, and 3 months later had been sitting alone in an exam room looking at a grainy black and white image of a heartbeat that was the best thing she'd ever done. That was the decision that had defined her life since. Everything after, the café, the apartment 2 blocks from a good park, the muffins on Saturday mornings, had organized itself around Finn. She had simplified. She had made clean, unambiguous choices. She did not have bandwidth for whatever this was, this noticing of a man who sat in her café every morning and watched the door and left $20 bills. She served him his coffee the next morning without meeting his eyes. He left another 20. The article found her on a Thursday, sent by Colleen as a link with no context other than a single question mark. Marlena opened it during the 20-minute lull between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, sitting on the stool behind the counter while Finn napped in the back room on the small cot she kept there. Seattle man linked to organized crime network under federal investigation. She read it once. She read it again. She turned the phone face down on the counter and sat very still for a moment, listening to the distant sound of the dishwasher and the rain against the front window. Then she turned the phone back over and looked at the photograph. It was from a city fundraising event 3 years old. He was in a suit. He looked exactly like himself. Dante Morrow, 40 years old, named in connection with a federal investigation into money laundering, extortion, and 3 open homicide cases. Second generation. His father had built something in Seattle over 30 years, using the words investment and real estate development as the public-facing skin of a structure that federal prosecutors were currently peeling back layer by layer. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She thought about the way he'd turned his chair to face Finn. She thought about the question he'd asked about dinosaurs, not the performative question. Adults ask children to be polite, but a real question, one that had required Finn to think before answering. She thought about the specific quality of his attention, the way it had looked less like a man being courteous, and more like a man encountering something he hadn't known he was going to want. She went home that night and made Finn's dinner and gave him a bath and sat on the edge of his bed reading the same book about a caterpillar who ate everything she had read to him approximately 400 times, and when he was asleep, she sat in her kitchen with a cup of tea going cold and tried to arrange her thoughts into something actionable. She didn't sleep. She had decided by morning that she was going to say something. She was still deciding what when he didn't come at his usual time. 8:15 passed. 8:40. 9. She had already begun to revise the plan. Maybe the decision had been made for her. Maybe he wasn't coming back. Maybe this was simply over in the way some things ended, without resolution. When the door chimed at 9:20 and Dante walked in, and his eyes found her the moment he crossed the threshold. He knew. She couldn't have explained how she was certain of that, but she was. "The usual?" she said, because her hands knew what to do even when her brain was still catching up. In a minute, he walked to the counter, stood directly across from her, close enough that the effort of looking elsewhere would have been obvious. "I need to tell you something." "I already know," she said. A pause. "What do you know?" "Your name, the full version." She kept her voice level. She had been practicing level since approximately 2 in the morning. "I know about the investigation. I know what your family is involved in." She met his eyes. "I know I've probably been serving coffee to someone the FBI is actively interested in." He held her gaze without flinching, "And yet here you are." "I'm standing behind my own counter," she said. "You're the one who keeps choosing to come back." "Yes," he said, "I do." Something in the simplicity of that, no deflection, no performance, made her hands still on the counter. "Why?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved briefly to the back room where Finn was beginning to stir. Small shuffling sounds, the preliminary stage before waking. Then he looked back at her, and the thing in his expression she'd been refusing to name was right there on the surface of him now, unmistakable. "I need you to hear all of it," he said, "before you say anything back." That's never a sentence that ends well. "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He told her at the small table by the window, where Finn had sat with his crayons. Colleen had taken Finn to the park across the street. Marlena had asked without explaining why, and Colleen had read her face and asked no questions, which was one of the things Marlena loved most about her. The café was between crowds. Dante sat across from her, with his hands flat on the table, and told her the truth in the same measured voice he did everything. 5 years ago, he said, he had made an anonymous donation to a fertility clinic in Capitol Hill. His lawyer had told him not to. He'd done it anyway. He'd been 35, and in the middle of something that had made the shape of his life very clear to him, the weight of the name, the decisions already made on his behalf before he'd been old enough to make them himself. And he had wanted, just once, something that existed outside of it, something that would bear no marks of who he was. He'd told himself it would stay sealed. He'd told himself he would never look. He had looked. 8 months ago, he said, when she asked. "I found the record. It took money and the right leverage, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She said nothing. "I came to the cafe because I needed to see if he was." He paused. A real pause, not a rhetorical one. "I needed to know he was okay. That was the only intention I had. I was going to sit in the back and drink 1 cup of coffee and leave and not come back." "But you came back," she said. "He walked over to my table and told me I had a blue pen." Marlena's throat tightened in a way she didn't let go anywhere. "I know what I am," Dante said. "I've known since I was 12 years old and understood what my father's business actually meant. I've spent the last several years trying to extract myself from it, cooperating with the federal inquiry, restructuring the legitimate holdings, doing the things that are very slow and very unglamorous, and don't look like anything from the outside. None of that makes me a good man. I'm not telling you it does. I'm telling you that I didn't come here to take anything from you. I'm not making a claim. I don't have the right to make a claim." "Then what are you doing?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "I came this morning because the federal investigators are going to come to you. They have the clinic records. They're going to explain the donor file and what it means in the context of the investigation, and I didn't want you to find out that way. From them. I didn't want that to be how you learned it. Why does it matter how I learned it?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the window, she could see Colleen pushing Finn on the swing across the street, Finn's head thrown back the way it was when he was laughing, full body and unreserved, the way only small children laughed. "Because you didn't deserve to be ambushed," Dante said. "And because He stopped, started again. "I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting you. I came here for 1 cup of coffee, and I have been unable to stop coming back. And I am aware of how that sounds. And I'm telling you anyway because I decided this morning that I was not going to do this in half measures. Marlena looked at him for a long time. He looked back. He's extraordinary, Dante said quietly. I know you know that. But I want you to know that I see it. He's exactly the kind of person I would have. He stopped again, and this time the thing that moved across his face was something she recognized from the inside. The specific grief of a door that had been closed a long time ago, briefly glimpsed from the outside and found to be still lit. The federal agent came on Friday, professional, thorough, apologetic in the practiced way of someone whose job involved delivering information people hadn't asked for. She confirmed the subpoena, the unsealed file, and 3 times said the word courtesy when she meant obligation. She told Marlena she was under no suspicion. She left a card and a pamphlet about victim support resources, which Marlena set on the counter and did not pick up. After the agent left, Marlena stood alone in the empty café and looked at the table by the back wall. She thought about a man who had come in every morning for 3 weeks and done nothing, except drink his coffee and listen to her son talk about whatever Finn decided the world needed to hear that day. She thought about the specific quality of the hunger she had seen in him. She could name it now, had stopped resisting the word, and how it had looked less like wanting to take something and more like someone standing outside in the rain, not expecting to be let in, just needing to know the light was on. She had built this cafe from nothing. She had built her entire life, really, from a borrowed $600 and a willingness to make the decision that scared her, because she'd learned, at 29, that waiting for conditions to be perfect was another way of never moving at all. She had taken the biggest risk of her life in a clinic exam room with paper on the table and a nurse whose name she couldn't remember, and it had become the truest thing she'd ever done. She knew something about decisions that looked like mistakes from the outside. He came back on Monday. She was ready, which meant she had made no final decisions, had instead spent the entire weekend moving back and forth across the question and arriving, by Sunday night, somewhere that wasn't a decision exactly, but was at least honest. She brought him his coffee, and then she sat down across from him, which she had never done, and she folded her hands on the table. "Here's what I know," she said. "You withheld something significant for 3 weeks. That's not nothing." "No," he said. "What you are, what you've been part of, that's not nothing either." "I know." She looked at him carefully. "I have one thing in my life that I won't put at risk. You understand that?" "I do. So if I were ever going to allow anything, I would need the truth. Not the version of the truth that's been run through a lawyer. What's actually true, what I'd actually be looking at." She held his gaze, because I don't do half measures either. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The investigation is going to resolve. I've been cooperating for 11 months. My attorney would rather I didn't say that, but my attorney isn't here." He kept his eyes on hers. "I'm not my father. I've been trying, for a long time, to be something different, and I haven't always succeeded. And I'm not going to tell you I'm a good man, because I genuinely don't know if that's true yet. What I can tell you is that I have resources and I have people, and nothing from my world will reach yours. I will not allow it." "That's a significant promise," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She looked at him for a long time. He let her look, without fidgeting, without filling the silence. He simply sat there and let himself be assessed, which she thought was probably the most honest thing she'd seen a person do in years. "Finn has preschool on Thursdays," she said finally. "But on Saturday mornings, he comes in with me and we make the muffins before the cafe opens. He eats roughly 40% of the batter and considers this non-negotiable." She watched his face. "We start at 7. Dante went very still. "You could come at 7, she said, "if you wanted." The thing behind his eyes moved, rearranged itself into something she didn't have a name for, and decided she didn't need one. He didn't say thank you. She was glad. Thank you would have made it smaller than it was. 7, he said. "Don't be late. Finn runs the muffin operation, and he doesn't respond well to tardiness. I'll be on time. She believed him. Walking back behind the counter, she didn't know what to call this. She was clear-eyed about that much. This was not a clean situation. It was not simple. It was approximately the opposite of every careful choice she had made to protect the life she'd built. She did not know what you called a thing that started in a fertility clinic file and a rainy Tuesday morning and a 4-year-old's absolute certainty that every stranger at every table was worth walking over to meet. She did not know how you mapped a future that included a man who was trying to become something his name had never made room for. She did not know if she was brave or foolish or just tired enough of being the only person in her own story. What she knew was Saturday at 7 o'clock. What she knew was the look on a man's face when he understood that someone was making the choice to open the door. And she thought about Finn on the swing, head thrown back, laughing at nothing but the fact of being in motion, and she thought that every good thing she'd ever had started exactly like this. With the decision that looked, from the outside, like it was probably a mistake, and turned out to be the truest thing she'd ever done. She put the muffin pans out on the counter to be ready for Saturday. She was already looking forward to it.